Right, let's return back to that story now. The Constitutional Court has dismissed an application by independent candidates challenging the 200 regional and 200 compensatory seat split in the National Assembly. Justice Nonkosi Mhlanhla found the Association for Independent Candidates and Build One South Africa application failed to prove the split is irrational. For more on this, we joined now by ActionSA spokesperson Lerato Ngobeni. Lerato, good to have you, and thank you very much for your time. Let's start firstly with the lower threshold. Do you believe a lower threshold for independent candidates, while the threshold for parties not registered in the National Assembly or in the provincial legislature remaining high, would make for fairer elections?
So, firstly, good evening, Thabo, and good evening to your viewers. Look, ActionSA, from inception, coming out of the People's Dialogue, one of the critical values that came out of the process was the idea that we had to consider a process through which, there is a consideration for electoral reform. And so we've been committed to that process, which is why, sorry, if my screen is going up and down, it's because I'm in load shedding. So I'm trying to, as best as I can, to be connected to the feed. But to say that we've been committed to electoral reform, and so for us, it's been a process of thinking about what would it look like for us to be able to have maximum participation in the process, in the political process of our country, a democracy that is still growing, that is still very young, and that also has to, go through a very significant growing pains. So a lower threshold for independence for us is not necessarily something that we had been hoping for. We had been hoping for a lower threshold for everyone, but we do think that after the consideration of the ConCourt, that a lower threshold for particularly independents is a welcomed one. And I say this because, political parties inherently have a far larger, or can be expected to have a far larger resource base than what an independent would have. And so we welcome the judgment. We welcome it on that basis, but it does not differ from the fact that we are, very committed to a reconsideration of what an electoral reform process would look like for a growing democratic South African market into the future. And so we do welcome the judgment on that basis.
So you will have progressive and non-progressive independent candidates. How do you feel about the fact that you lower the threshold, which means by and large you might now be able to get a whole lot more independent candidates who can reach the 1,000 signature threshold, who will be participating and say they do win and they continue to win the regional seats without the compensatory seats, because that is what the law says. Is that not going to in any way affect our democracy?
So we signed up for that, Thabo, at the inception of our democracy. We signed up for a multi-party democracy where voices are not silenced, where everybody gets an opportunity and a chance to make a contribution to the electoral process, to make a contribution to the political process that isn't always right. And I think that we are heading towards that. And I think South Africans are particularly hard on ourselves when it comes to, how we should be faring, purely because of, how late we came into quote-unquote independence and how late we came into a democratic dispensation. And so for us, every step that we make closer to what the ethos of what our democratic principles would look like, that fair in the advancement of the perfecting of the South African democratic project would look like, is something that we are very committed to. So yes, the ballot box or the ballot paper coming next year is going to be very, very, very long. But let South Africans look at that and see how that makes them feel. Ultimately, it is the South African people who must determine what it will eventually look like. Does this work or does this not work? And from where we are sitting is a process through which, we came into a democratic dispensation coming out of pain. And every decision that has been made from a place of pain equals the situation we currently find ourselves. And so we need to find a place of comfort and then say, how do we then make this comfortable space optimal? Yeah. And so you might find that, a couple of years from now, South Africans might say, we actually are very confused. Let us look at all of these parties, whether they are center-right, whether they are all the way to the center, whether they are center-left or all the way to the left, and say, you all must come together. You guys must come together. Those of you who are leaning towards one another, how do you make a meeting of the minds in such a way that those meeting of the minds advance the aspirations, the wills of the South African people? And so that's not where we are at the moment. At the moment, it's everybody's iteration of what the will of the South African people looks like. And so I think this process, and we definitely think that this process, while it may not be ideal, and a long ballot box, while it may not be ideal at the current juncture, as a democracy, we are still very young and we are perfecting our model. And this is our process to doing that. And so we welcome the judgment on that basis. We welcome it on behalf of the South African people to say, us as ActionSA, came into this space knowing that would be the threshold. We came into it not trying to change the Electoral Act, but to say we recognize that currently we must work with what we have. And so as ActionSA, we are literally almost very, very, very close. Actually, I think we're 98%, if I looked at the numbers this afternoon, to meeting the threshold for a fully fledged political party and not for independence. So we welcome the judgment on behalf of independence, because it does take resources and very significant resources to reach the stipulated threshold as it pertained to the Electoral Act. So for independence to reach 1,000, we think that's an achievable threshold, because we look for that anyway as political parties for different constituencies. So
what does that mean? You are 98% there. Does that mean you have now a majority of the provinces meeting the threshold? In other words, you will be represented in all 9 of the provinces.
Absolutely, it does. I mean, if you were looking at the matric pass rate that is at 30%, we are exceptional high achievers. I mean, we are sitting in some provinces. I think our lowest province is sitting at 75, 76% of the threshold. But the rest of our province, we have provinces that have exceeded the threshold so incredibly that unfortunately we actually can't extrapolate those thresholds to be able to supplement those that have not. And so in all of the 9 provinces, the lowest threshold that we have achieved to date is at 80%, and the highest threshold is between 150% plus of the threshold set for that province. But for the rest of our provinces, we are sitting literally in the higher 90 percentile threshold. So in the next month or so, in the coming 2 weeks or so even, ActionSA will have reached its threshold. But if, in fact, you are looking at a threshold that was not provincially demarcated, in other words, there is a threshold for Gauteng that Gautengers must reach, there's a threshold for KZN and so on. If that was not the case, as ActionSA, if you looked at us nationally, we've actually exceeded the threshold. Yeah. So, without giving away, all of our stats and all of our data, I can tell you here with the greatest of confidence. I mean, we also believe in transparency. So if you really wanted me to go into it, I can. But, I don't think that's the purpose of this discussion. But I definitely can
at a later stage, I'm sure we will do that.
That ActionSA is actually ready to contest the 2024 election.